What happens when an entire galaxy writes off humanity as primitive backwater dwellers, only to discover they've been building something in the shadows for decades? What occurs when species that have conquered star systems for millennia suddenly face opponents who refuse to follow the established rules of galactic warfare? The Zephyrian Empire thought they knew everything about war. They had crushed 47 civilizations, absorbed their technologies, and turned entire star systems into smoking ruins. Their battle fleets were legendary, their tactics flawless, their victory inevitable. They had never encountered humans. In the depths of space, where ancient trade routes cross and empires rise and fall, a conflict is about to begin that will rewrite everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare, determination, and the terrifying ingenuity that emerges when humanity decides that surrender is not an option. Welcome to the day the galaxy learned why humans don't just fight wars, they revolutionize them. The silence in the command center of the Zephyrian flagship Eternal Dominion was absolute. Admiral Crothvar stared at the holographic display showing the sensor readings from the outer rim of the Kepler sector, his forearms crossed in a gesture of deep contemplation. The data made no sense. Run the scan again, he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had conquered 17 star systems in the name of the Zephyrian Empire. The bridge crew, a mix of scaled Zephyrians and various enslaved species, scrambled to comply. Lieutenant Vextal, a nervous young officer with luminescent spots along his neck, hesitated before speaking. Admiral, we've run the scan 12 times. The readings remain consistent. We're detecting approximately 15,000 human vessels approaching the Kepler defense line. Crothvar's eyes narrowed. 15,000 ships. The number was absurd. According to Imperial intelligence, the entire human space fleet consisted of maybe 300 vessels, most of them outdated cargo haulers converted for military use. The humans were a young species, barely 2 centuries into space travel. They controlled only a handful of systems on the galactic rim, farming worlds mostly, with a few mining operations. What class of vessels? Crothvar asked, though he suspected the sensors were malfunctioning. Perhaps solar flares from the nearby star were creating false readings. That's where it gets strange, sir. Vextal's voice cracked slightly. The computer can't classify them. The energy signatures don't match any known ship designs in our database. They're not using fusion cores like most civilizations, and they're not using the quantum drives that we've seen from the more advanced species. Admiral Crothvar moved to the central command platform, his boots clicking against the polished metal floor. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion was a testament to Zephyrian engineering excellence, with curved walls displaying real-time tactical information and energy conduits pulsing with blue light. He had commanded this ship through the conquest of the Altair colony, the destruction of the Proxima defense fleet, and the systematic elimination of the Centauri resistance. Each victory had been swift, decisive, and profitable for the Empire. Show me the tactical breakdown of our forces, he ordered. The hologram shifted, displaying the Zephyrian battle formation. 800 ships of the line, each one a masterpiece of military engineering. The heavy cruisers mounted plasma cannons capable of melting through titanium hull plating. The destroyers carried antimatter torpedoes that could crack a planet's crust. The battleships featured shields that had never been penetrated by enemy fire. Sir, we also have support from the Rigelian mercenary fleet, reported Commander Tilaisera, a veteran of 30 campaigns. Another 400 ships, including their famous Ghost interceptors, plus the orbital defense platforms around Kepler Prime, have been upgraded with the latest quantum disruptors. Crothvar nodded. 1,200 ships, plus fixed defenses. The humans would face a force that had never lost a major engagement. The Zephyrian Empire had built its reputation on overwhelming firepower and perfect coordination. Their battle doctrine was simple: advance in formation, destroy all resistance, claim the territory. What do we know about human military capabilities? He asked. Intelligence officer Zethmol consulted his datapad. Very limited, sir. They've never engaged in large-scale warfare with any of the major powers. Most of their conflicts have been internal civil wars or minor skirmishes with pirates. They use kinetic weapons primarily, actual projectiles fired by chemical propulsion or magnetic acceleration. Primitive, but reliable. Kinetic weapons? Commander HFY Sci-Fi laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the bridge. What's next? Throwing rocks. How do they expect to penetrate modern deflector shields with chunks of metal? They've shown some innovation in recent years, Zethmol continued. Reports indicate they've developed something called railgun technology, which can accelerate projectiles to significant fractions of light speed. But, against our adaptive shielding systems, it should prove ineffective. Crothvar studied the display showing the approaching human fleet. The ships appeared as simple dots of light, still 3 hours away from the outer defense perimeter. Standard protocol would be to hail them, demand their surrender, and then begin the systematic destruction of their forces when they inevitably refused. But something nagged at him. Why would the humans commit their entire fleet to an assault on the heavily defended Kepler sector? Intelligence reports suggested they were a practical species, given to careful planning and risk assessment. This attack seemed like suicide. Perhaps they've developed new technology, suggested Lieutenant Vextal. Our spies reported unusual construction activity in the Sol system over the past 2 years. Large-scale shipbuilding projects, new facilities on Luna and Mars. Irrelevant, Crothvar decided. New technology requires testing, refinement, years of development. You can't revolutionize warfare overnight. He was wrong, but he wouldn't realize it for another 2 hours and 47 minutes. In the depths of space, the human fleet continued its approach. Unlike the rigid formations favored by most galactic militaries, the human ships moved in loose, seemingly chaotic patterns. To Zephyrian sensors, they appeared disorganized, lacking the precise coordination that marked a professional military force. Captain Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the tactical display with calm focus. Around her, the crew worked with quiet efficiency, monitoring systems, and making final preparations. The ship hummed with barely contained energy, its revolutionary fusion electric drive system providing power levels that would have seemed impossible just 5 years earlier. Status report, she requested. All systems green, reported her XO, Commander Marcus Rivera. The new hull plating is holding steady, stealth systems are active, and weapons are charged and ready. What about the fleet? 14,962 ships reporting ready for engagement. The civilian volunteers have been assigned to the outer formations, while the professional military units are maintaining the inner assault groups. Captain Chen nodded. The human fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, not because of its size, but because of its composition. When the Zephyrian Empire had begun moving toward human space 6 months ago, demanding tribute and threatening invasion, every human world had contributed what they could. Mining ships had been converted into missile platforms. Cargo vessels had been fitted with armor plating and railguns. Even civilian yachts had been modified to carry sensor packages and communications equipment. But the real surprise wasn't the converted civilian ships. It was what humanity had been building in secret. How are our new friends holding up? Chen asked, glancing at the secondary display. The AI coordination systems are performing flawlessly, Rivera reported. Reaction times are at 0.3 seconds across the entire fleet. Every ship is linked into the tactical network. Chen smiled grimly. The Zephyrians thought they were facing a primitive species using kinetic weapons and chemical rockets. They had no idea that human engineers had spent the last decade developing artificial intelligence systems specifically designed for space warfare. Every human ship was essentially a node in a vast computational network, capable of coordinating attacks and defensive maneuvers within human precision. Energy readings from the enemy fleet? She asked. Significant, reported the tactical officer. Their shields are powered up and weapon systems are active. Standard Zephyrian battle formation, with heavy units in the center and fast attack craft on the flanks. They're preparing to receive a conventional assault, Chen observed. They expect us to charge directly into their formation and try to punch through with brute force. That would be the logical approach, given our apparent technological disadvantage, Rivera agreed. Chen studied the enemy positions. The Zephyrians had arranged their forces in a defensive sphere around Kepler Prime, with overlapping fields of fire and multiple fallback positions. It was a textbook defensive setup, designed to channel attacking forces into killing zones where they could be systematically destroyed. Signal the fleet, she ordered. Implement Protocol 7. Across the human formation, 15,000 ships began a transformation that would have been impossible for any other species in the galaxy. Instead of maintaining rigid formations, they began to disperse into what appeared to be complete chaos. Ships scattered in all directions, some accelerating toward the enemy, others seeming to retreat, still others moving at odd angles that made no tactical sense. But there was a pattern, one that only the AI coordination systems could perceive and execute. Every ship was moving to a precisely calculated position, creating a three-dimensional web of intersecting fields of fire. When the attack began, every human vessel would be able to target multiple enemy ships while maintaining clear lines of retreat. Admiral Crothvar watched the human fleet's dispersal with growing confusion. What are they doing, he muttered. Their formation is collapsing. Perhaps they've lost cohesion, suggested Commander HFY Sci-Fi. Young species often struggle with fleet coordination in high-stress situations. Or maybe they're retreating, added Lieutenant Vextal hopefully. But, even as he spoke, the sensors detected something that changed everything. The human ships weren't retreating. They were accelerating, but not toward the Zephyrian fleet. They were moving into positions that surrounded the defensive sphere on all sides. They're trying to encircle us, Crothvar realized. But that's tactically insane. They'll spread their forces so thin that each group will be vulnerable to concentrated fire. Should we begin the attack, sir? Asked Commander HFY Sci-Fi. Crothvar considered. The humans were still outside the effective range of most Zephyrian weapons, but their apparent lack of organization made them tempting targets. Begin long-range bombardment. Target the largest concentrations of enemy vessels. The order went out across the Zephyrian fleet. 800 ships began firing in coordinated volleys, sending streams of plasma bolts and antimatter torpedoes toward the scattered human formations. The weapons lit up space with brilliant flashes of energy, each shot capable of destroying a city. But something impossible happened. The human ships simply weren't there when the weapons arrived. What's our hit percentage? Crothvar demanded. 0%, sir, reported the gunnery officer, his voice tight with disbelief. All shots missed their intended targets. How is that possible? Our targeting computers are the most advanced in the galaxy. The enemy ships appear to be making last-second course corrections, the officer explained. They're detecting our weapons' fire and moving out of the way. Crothvar felt the first stirring of unease. Dodging weapons fire required incredibly fast sensors and navigation systems. More importantly, it required split-second coordination across thousands of ships. No species in the galaxy possessed that level of fleet integration. Continue firing, he ordered. Increase the rate of fire. They can't dodge everything. For the next 20 minutes, the Zephyrian fleet poured destructive energy into the void, trying to hit the elusive human ships. Occasionally, they scored a hit, destroying one of the converted civilian vessels or damaging a military ship. But for every human vessel destroyed, dozens of Zephyrian shots missed their targets entirely. And then, the humans began to fire back. The first indication was a series of bright flashes from the human fleet, barely visible against the backdrop of stars. Then, the sensors detected incoming projectiles, thousands of them, approaching at velocities that made no sense. Incoming fire, shouted the tactical officer. Multiple projectiles, velocity 0.75 light speed. 0.75 light speed. That was faster than anything the Zephyrians had ever encountered. Most kinetic weapons maxed out at maybe 10% of light speed. These projectiles were moving at relativistic velocities, carrying kinetic energy equivalent to antimatter warheads. Evasive maneuvers. Crothvar commanded, but it was too late. The first wave of human railgun projectiles struck the Zephyrian fleet with devastating effect. The tungsten steel slugs, accelerated by magnetic fields powered by fusion reactors, punched through deflector shields as if they weren't there. The kinetic energy was so enormous that it didn't matter what the shields were designed to stop. The sheer momentum of the projectiles overwhelmed the defensive systems. The Zephyrian destroyer Righteous Fury took a direct hit amidships. The projectile, no larger than a baseball but moving at 3/4 light speed, vaporized on impact, and released enough energy to crack the ship in half. The explosion lit up space for several seconds before fading to leave only scattered debris. Shields down on decks 7 through 12, reported the damage control officer aboard the Eternal Dominion. Hull breach on the starboard side. Crothvar stared at the tactical display in shock. His flagship had been hit by something that their sensors had barely detected. The human weapons weren't just fast, they were nearly invisible until the moment of impact. Return fire. All units, concentrate fire on the nearest human ships. But the humans had already moved. The ships that had fired the devastating salvo were no longer in position, having scattered to new coordinates while the projectiles were still in flight. The Zephyrian return fire struck empty space, and more human projectiles were incoming. Sir, Lieutenant Vextal's voice was strained. I'm reading massive energy discharges from the human fleet. They're firing again. How many ships? All of them, sir. Nearly 15,000 vessels are firing simultaneously. Crothvar felt something he had never experienced in 30 years of military service. Genuine fear. 15,000 ships, each firing projectiles at relativistic speeds. The mathematical reality was inescapable. Even if only a fraction of the shots found their targets, the Zephyrian fleet would be decimated. Signal the Rigelian mercenaries, he ordered. Tell them to begin their attack run now. The Rigelian Ghost Interceptors were the fastest ships in the sector, capable of nearly instantaneous acceleration and equipped with phase shift technology that made them difficult to target. If anyone could close the distance and engage the humans at close range, it would be them. But, as the 400 Rigelian ships began their approach, something unexpected happened. The human fleet, which had been spread across thousands of cubic kilometers of space, suddenly began to converge. Ships that had been light minutes apart were somehow coordinating their movements with perfect precision. They're forming attack groups, observed Commander HFY Sci-Fi. But, how are they communicating across such distances? Even quantum entanglement communications have limitations. The answer would have surprised her. The humans weren't relying on traditional communications at all. The AI coordination systems aboard each ship were constantly calculating and predicting the movements of every other vessel in the fleet. They operated on shared algorithms and synchronized timing, creating a form of coordination that transcended the limitations of physics. As the Rigelian ships approached, they found themselves facing not scattered human vessels, but organized strike groups that moved with unified purpose. The human ships didn't just fire their railguns. They fired them in carefully coordinated volleys that created walls of projectiles moving through space at different velocities. The first Rigelian interceptor to enter the kill zone lasted exactly 2.3 seconds. Its phase shift technology, designed to make it difficult for energy weapons to lock on, was useless against kinetic projectiles that filled entire cubic kilometers of space. The ship materialized directly into the path of a tungsten slug and simply ceased to exist. Within 10 minutes, the vaunted Rigelian Ghost Interceptor fleet had been reduced to scattered wreckage. Admiral Crothvar watched the destruction with growing horror. This wasn't a battle, it was an execution. The humans weren't following any known rules of warfare. They weren't even fighting like a military force. They were fighting like a single organism with 15,000 limbs, each one perfectly coordinated with all the others. Sir, the communications officer called out. We're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. Put it through. The main display flickered and showed the image of a human female in a military uniform. She appeared calm, almost relaxed, as if the battle raging around her was of minor importance. Admiral Crothvar, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the bridge. I am Captain Sarah Chun of the United Earth Space Force. I'm authorized to offer you one opportunity to surrender. Crothvar's forearms trembled with rage. Surrender? You dare to demand the surrender of the Zephyrian Empire? I'm offering you the chance to save the lives of your remaining crew members, Chun replied. Your tactical position is untenable. Your fleet has lost 40% of its ships, and you have no effective countermeasures against our weapons. It was true, and Crothvar knew it. The Zephyrian formation was collapsing. Ships were breaking ranks, trying to escape the relentless barrage of human projectiles. The orbital defense platforms around Kepler Prime had been reduced to floating debris. What are your terms? He asked, the words bitter in his mouth. Complete withdrawal from human space, Chun replied. Immediate cessation of hostilities. And formal recognition of humanity's sovereignty over our current territories. And if I refuse? Captain Chin's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her eyes. Then, we continue this engagement until there are no Zephyrian ships left to fight. Crothvar looked at his tactical display one more time. The human fleet was still moving, still coordinating with impossible precision. They had suffered minimal losses while inflicting catastrophic damage on his forces. And, according to the sensors, they still had most of their ammunition remaining. For the first time in the history of the Zephyrian Empire, an Imperial Admiral was about to surrender. But, before he could respond, new alerts began flashing across his command console. Additional human ships were arriving from hyperspace, not hundreds or thousands, but tens of thousands. The reinforcements that were jumping into the system dwarfed even the massive fleet that had already demonstrated its overwhelming superiority. How many? He whispered. 50,000 additional vessels, reported Lieutenant Vextal, his voice hollow. Admiral, the humans have been hiding their true fleet strength. This first wave was just their advance force. Crothvar closed his eyes. The galaxy was about to learn a very important lesson about humanity, and the Zephyrian Empire was going to be the teacher. The hyperspace emergent signatures lit up every sensor array within 3-star systems. Captain Sarah Chun watched from the bridge of the UES Defiance as wave after wave of human ships materialized in normal space, their fusion drives casting brilliant points of light against the darkness. The reinforcements weren't just arriving. They were arriving in perfect formation, each ship emerging at precisely calculated coordinates that maximized the tactical advantage. Fleet Admiral Morrison is requesting communication, reported Lieutenant Zhang from the communication station. Put him through, Chen ordered. The holographic display shimmered and revealed Fleet Admiral James Morrison, a weathered veteran whose calm demeanor had earned him the nickname Ice Mountain among the human forces. Behind him, the bridge of the UES Resolution hummed with activity as his staff coordinated the deployment of the largest military force in human history. Captain Sean Morrison's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Status report. Initial engagement is complete, sir. Enemy losses at approximately 60%. Admiral Crothvar appears ready to negotiate surrender terms. Morrison nodded. Understood. However, our intelligence indicates this is merely the advance force of a much larger Zephyrian invasion fleet. Long-range sensors are detecting additional enemy formations approaching from the Vega sector. Chun felt a chill run down her spine. How many ships, sir? Conservative estimate? 3,000 vessels, including their new Titan-class battleships and the infamous Black Fleet mercenaries. They're 6 hours out and closing fast. The implications were staggering. The Zephyrian Empire had committed not just a regional force, but a significant portion of their entire military to this campaign. They hadn't come to demand tribute. They had come to eliminate humanity as a potential threat. Sir, what are our orders? The Joint Chiefs and the civilian government have made a decision, Morrison replied, his expression growing grimmer. This ends here. Not just this battle, but the threat itself. We're implementing Operation Prometheus. Chin's breath caught. Operation Prometheus was the most classified military project in human space, something so secret that even most senior officers knew only rumors. Sir, are you certain? The vote was unanimous. The Zephyrian Empire has made it clear that they view humanity as nothing more than potential slaves. They've destroyed 17 civilizations and enslaved billions of sentient beings. They've given us no choice but to demonstrate exactly why that approach won't work with humans. Around the bridge, Chin's officers exchanged glances. Everyone had heard whispers about Prometheus, stories of weapons so powerful they could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. But nobody had imagined they would ever be used. What about the surviving Zephyrian ships? Chin asked. Admiral Crothvar will be given one final opportunity to order a complete withdrawal. If he refuses, Morrison paused. Then, the galaxy will witness the birth of a new era. The transmission ended, leaving Chun alone with her thoughts and the weight of what was coming. She turned to her XO, Commander Rivera, who had gone pale despite his dark complexion. Marcus, signal the fleet. All civilian volunteers are to withdraw to minimum safe distance. Professional military units will maintain engagement positions. Ma'am, what about Admiral Crothvar? Open a channel. The main display flickered again, showing the Zephyrian flagship's bridge. Admiral Crothvar looked like he had aged 10 years in the past hour. His scaled skin had lost much of its luster, and his forearms hung limply at his sides as he stared at the tactical display showing the deployment of the human reinforcements. Admiral, Chin began, her voice carrying a formality that hadn't been there before. I've been authorized to make one final offer. Crothvar's eyes focused on her image. What are your terms? Complete and immediate withdrawal of all Zephyrian forces from this sector. This includes the main invasion fleet currently approaching from Vega. You have 30 minutes to recall them and begin your retreat. 30 minutes? Crothvar's voice carried a bitter laugh. Even if I agreed to such terms, the main fleet is under the command of High Admiral Vexthal. He would never accept orders to retreat, especially from a species he considers inferior. Then, contact him directly, Chin replied. Explain the situation. Show him the tactical data from this engagement. You don't understand, Crothvar said, shaking his head. High Admiral Vexthal is not just a military commander. He's a member of the Imperial Council, a direct descendant of the first Emperor. He views this campaign as a test of Zephyrian supremacy. He would rather see his entire fleet destroyed than accept defeat from humans. Chin studied the alien's expression and recognized the truth in his words. She had encountered this type of leader before, individuals so committed to their own superiority that they couldn't adapt to changing circumstances. They were dangerous because they would escalate conflicts far beyond rational limits. Admiral Crothvar, what I'm about to tell you must remain classified, but I want you to understand the gravity of the situation. The weapons you face today represent approximately 10% of humanity's current military capability. Crothvar's eyes widened. That's impossible. Your intelligence reports told you what we wanted them to tell you. Chin interrupted. For the past 5 years, humanity has been preparing for exactly this scenario. We knew that eventually, one of the major galactic powers would view our expansion as a threat. We've been ready. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Admiral, you have the opportunity to save millions of lives, both Zephyrian and human. Contact High Admiral Vexthal. Convince him to withdraw. Because if those ships enter this system, I can guarantee you that very few of them will leave. The transmission ended. Chun turned to her tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Park. How long until the enemy main fleet arrives? 5 hours, 40 minutes. But, Admiral, long-range sensors are picking up something else. The Zephyrian fleet isn't alone. Chin's blood ran cold. Explain. Multiple species, sir. We're detecting ship signatures from the Alteron Confederacy, the Rigelian Mercenary Guild, and what appears to be a cetacean battle group. It's not just an invasion force, it's a coalition. The tactical situation had just become exponentially more complex. The approaching fleet wasn't just Zephyrian ships. It was a multi-species force that represented a significant portion of the galaxy's military power. Someone had convinced several major civilizations that humanity posed a threat requiring immediate elimination. Numbers? Chin asked. Conservative estimate, 8,000 ships. Mixed classes, but including at least 24 super dreadnoughts and multiple planet killer weapons. Chin closed her eyes and did the math. Even with their technological advantages, 15,000 human ships against 8,000 alien vessels would result in catastrophic losses. The human fleet might win, but the cost would be devastating. Unless Operation Prometheus was everything the rumors claimed it was. Signal Fleet Admiral Morrison, she ordered. Priority Alpha communication. Morrison's image appeared almost instantly. Captain, I assume you've detected the full scope of the incoming threat. Yes, sir. 8,000 ships, multiple species. Someone has convinced half the galaxy that we need to be eliminated. Our intelligence sources confirm it, Morrison replied. The Zephyrian Empire has been spreading propaganda for months, claiming that humanity is developing weapons of mass destruction. They've convinced several species that we represent an existential threat to galactic civilization. Chen almost laughed at the irony. Sir, are they wrong? Morrison's expression was grim. That remains to be seen, Captain. But I can tell you this. After today, there won't be any doubt about humanity's place in the galactic hierarchy. The transmission switched to fleet-wide broadcast. Morrison's voice echoed across every human ship in the system, reaching nearly 70,000 crew members spread across 65,000 vessels. This is Fleet Admiral Morrison to all human forces. Today, we face the largest military coalition assembled in galactic history. They come here believing that humanity is weak, that we are technologically inferior, that we can be conquered and enslaved like so many civilizations before us. Chen could see her bridge crew straightening, their attention focused entirely on Morrison's words. They are about to learn why that assumption is fatally flawed. For the past decade, humanity has been preparing for this moment. We have developed technologies that our enemies cannot imagine. We have created weapons that will reshape warfare itself. And we have built a military force that operates with precision and coordination that no other species has ever achieved. Across the fleet, ships began moving into new formations. The seemingly chaotic deployment that had confused the Zephyrians was being replaced by something even more complex, a three-dimensional matrix that positioned each vessel for maximum tactical efficiency. But before we demonstrate our capabilities, Morrison continued, I want every human in this fleet to understand what we're fighting for. We're not fighting for territory or resources. We're not fighting for glory or revenge. We're fighting for the right of every sentient species to exist without fear of conquest and enslavement. Chen found herself nodding. This was what separated humanity from empires like the Zephyrians. They weren't seeking to dominate others. They were establishing the principle that domination itself was unacceptable. The enemy fleet will arrive in this system in approximately 5 hours. When they do, they will face the full might of human ingenuity, determination, and technological superiority. Today, we don't just win a battle. Today, we change the galaxy. The broadcast ended, but its effects were immediate. Across the human fleet, crew members returned to their duties with renewed focus. The converted civilian ships began withdrawing to safer distances, while the military vessels moved into attack positions. But the most significant change was invisible to enemy sensors. Deep within the bowels of each major human warship, systems that had never been tested in combat began their startup sequences. Fusion reactors that operated at temperatures approaching those found in stellar cores came online. Particle accelerators that could have served as the main engines of smaller ships began charging their magnetic fields. And, in the most heavily shielded compartments, devices that manipulated matter at the quantum level hummed with barely contained energy. Operation Prometheus wasn't just a weapon. It was a fundamental advancement in military technology that would make everything that came before seem primitive by comparison. Admiral Crothvar, meanwhile, was struggling with a decision that could determine the fate of his entire species. The communication array on his flagship was configured for long-range transmission, capable of reaching the approaching coalition fleet. But he knew that contacting High Admiral Vexthal would likely be seen as an admission of cowardice. Sir, Lieutenant Vexthal approached hesitantly. The human fleet is repositioning. They're forming some kind of defensive matrix around the inner system. Defensive? Crothvar studied the tactical display. The human ships weren't retreating or preparing to flee. They were taking positions that suggested they intended to fight against overwhelming odds. They know they're outnumbered 4-1. Why aren't they withdrawing? Perhaps they're planning to make a final stand, suggested Commander HFY Sci-Fi. Some species prefer to die fighting rather than surrender. But Crothvar wasn't convinced. The humans had demonstrated tactical sophistication far beyond what anyone had expected. They wouldn't commit their entire fleet to a hopeless battle unless they had some kind of advantage that wasn't apparent. Open a channel to High Admiral Vexthal, he decided. The transmission took several minutes to establish, given the distance involved. When the connection finally stabilized, the image of High Admiral Vexthal appeared on the main display. The senior officer was everything that Crothvar was not. Tall, imposing, with scales that gleamed like polished armor. His reputation as both a brilliant tactician and a ruthless leader was legendary throughout the Empire. Admiral Crothvar. Vexthal's voice carried barely concealed contempt. I trust you have secured the Kepler sector as ordered. High Admiral, the situation has become complicated. Vexthal's expression darkened. Explain. Crothvar transmitted the tactical data from the battle, showing the destruction of his fleet and the capabilities demonstrated by the human ships. He watched Vexthal's face as the senior officer processed the information. This is obviously fabricated data, Vexthal declared after reviewing the files. Humans lack the technology to achieve these results. Their entire civilization is barely 2 centuries old. Sir, I witnessed these events personally. The humans have weapons and coordination capabilities far exceeding our intelligence estimates. Then, you are either lying or incompetent, Vexthal replied coldly. The coalition fleet will arrive in this system in 4 hours. When we do, we will demonstrate proper military tactics. You will redeem yourself by leading the assault on their remaining forces. High Admiral, I respectfully request that you consider the possibility that human military technology represents a significant threat. Perhaps we should attempt diplomatic. Enough. Vexthal's roar echoed across the communication channel. The Zephyrian Empire does not negotiate with inferior species. We conquer them. You will prepare your surviving ships to support the main assault. That is an order. The transmission ended, leaving Crothvar staring at a blank screen. He had tried to prevent what was coming, but Vexthal's pride and prejudice had made rational discussion impossible. Sir, Commander HFY Sci-Fi approached quietly. What are your orders? Crothvar looked at the tactical display showing the human fleet. 65,000 ships, most of them obviously civilian vessels that had been hastily converted for military use. But, at their core were several thousand purpose-built warships that had already demonstrated capabilities beyond anything in the Imperial database. Signal the human flagship, he ordered. Request private communication with Captain Chen. The channel opened within moments, showing Chen's calm face. Admiral Crothvar. Captain, I have attempted to contact High Admiral Vexthal as you requested. He has refused to consider withdrawal and insists on proceeding with the assault. Chen nodded, as if she had expected this response. I appreciate your efforts, Admiral. However, I'm authorized to offer you an alternative. What do you mean? Surrender your remaining ships to human forces. Your crews will be treated according to the Galactic Accords on prisoners of war. When this engagement is concluded, you'll be free to return to Zephyrian space. Hrothgar considered the offer. His remaining ships were severely damaged and outnumbered. Continuing to fight would accomplish nothing except the needless death of his crews. But surrender would end his career and possibly result in court-martial and execution. What guarantee do I have that my crews will be safe? My word as a fellow officer, Chen replied simply. And the fact that humanity has never executed prisoners of war in its entire history. The simplicity of the statement was somehow more convincing than any elaborate promise. Hrothgar made his decision. I accept your terms. My ships will power down their weapons and await your instructions. Thank you, Admiral. Your crews will be evacuated to safe distance before the main engagement begins. As the transmission ended, Hrothgar wondered if he was making the right choice. In 4 hours, he would find out exactly what humanity was capable of when they stopped holding back. And, somewhere in the depths of space, 8,000 ships continued their approach, unaware that they were flying toward a demonstration of warfare that would be studied by military historians for centuries to come. The coalition fleet emerged from hyperspace with all the ceremony of an imperial parade. 8,000 ships materialized in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the insignia of 6 different species united in a common purpose. At the center of the formation, the Zephyrian super-dreadnought Emperor's Wrath dominated the display like a floating city of war. Nearly 8 kilometers long and bristling with enough firepower to glass an entire planet, it represented the absolute pinnacle of galactic military technology. High Admiral Vexthal stood on the command bridge, his scaled hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the tactical displays. Around him, officers from multiple species worked at their stations with professional efficiency. The Alterans handled communications with their sophisticated translation matrices. The Rigelians managed sensor operations with their enhanced neural interfaces. The Cetaceans coordinated fleet movements with their collective consciousness protocols. It was the largest multi-species military force ever assembled, and it had come here to eliminate what they perceived as an existential threat to galactic civilization. Fleet status report, Vexthal commanded. All ships report ready for combat operations, replied Commander Zaytishrak, an Altiran whose crystalline skin reflected the bridge lighting in prismatic patterns. Coalition coordination protocols are active. We have perfect synchronization across all species and ship classes. Enemy fleet composition, approximately 65,000 vessels, but intelligence analysis suggests that 90% are civilian conversions with minimal military capability. True combat units number perhaps 5,000 ships. Vexthal nodded. The numbers were exactly what he had expected. Humanity had tried to compensate for their technological inferiority with sheer quantity, but quantity without quality was meaningless in modern warfare. What about Admiral Hrothgar's force? Sir, the communications officer hesitated. Admiral Hrothgar has surrendered his remaining ships to the human fleet. His crews are being evacuated to neutral territory. Vexthal's reaction was immediate and violent. His forearm slammed against the nearest console, sending sparks flying across the bridge. Coward. He has disgraced the Empire and violated direct orders. Sir, his tactical reports indicate that human military capabilities significantly exceed our estimates. Lies. Vexthal's roar echoed throughout the massive bridge. Hrothgar is attempting to justify his cowardice with fabricated intelligence. When this engagement is concluded, he will face court-martial and execution. The bridge fell silent. Every officer present understood that questioning Vexthal's judgment at this point would be career suicide. The High Admiral had staked his reputation and political standing on the assumption that humanity posed no real threat. Sir, the sensor operator called out, we're detecting movement from the human fleet. They're assuming attack formation. Vexthal moved to the central display, studying the three-dimensional tactical projection. The human ships were indeed moving, but their formation made no sense according to conventional military doctrine. Instead of concentrating their forces for a breakthrough assault or spreading thin for harassment attacks, they were arranging themselves in a complex geometric pattern that seemed to serve no tactical purpose. What kind of formation is that? He asked. Unknown, sir. It doesn't match any battle doctrine in our databases. The ships are positioning themselves at precise mathematical intervals, but the purpose is unclear. Vexthal studied the display more carefully. The human fleet wasn't just assuming a formation, they were creating something. The 65,000 ships were positioning themselves at specific coordinates that formed a vast three-dimensional matrix extending across millions of cubic kilometers. Perhaps it's some kind of sensor network, suggested Commander Zaytishrak. They might be trying to create an early warning system. Irrelevant, Vexthal decided. Begin the assault. All ships, advance in formation. Target the largest concentrations of enemy vessels. The coalition fleet began its approach with textbook precision. The heavy battleships moved forward in the center, their massive shields powered up and weapons charged. Fast attack craft spread out on the flanks, ready to exploit any weaknesses in the human formation. Support vessels maintained position behind the main force, their sensor arrays scanning for threats, and their communication systems coordinating the multi-species attack. It was exactly the kind of overwhelming force projection that had conquered dozens of star systems. The coalition commanders were confident that the battle would be concluded within hours, if not minutes. They were about to learn why confidence could be a fatal weakness. Aboard the UES Resolution, Fleet Admiral Morrison watched the approaching enemy fleet with calm focus. Around him, his command staff worked with quiet efficiency, monitoring systems that represented the culmination of decades of human scientific advancement. Enemy fleet is at maximum weapons range, reported the tactical officer. They're beginning long-range bombardment. Morrison nodded. The first phase of the engagement was about to begin, and it would set the tone for everything that followed. Signal all ships. Begin Operation Prometheus, Phase 1. Across the human fleet, 65,000 ships began to activate systems that had never been tested in actual combat. The converted civilian vessels, which the enemy had dismissed as military negligible, revealed their true purpose. Each one was equipped with a miniaturized fusion reactor and a single, highly specialized weapon system. They weren't meant to fight directly. They were meant to change the fundamental nature of space warfare. Prometheus grid is online, reported the operations officer. All nodes reporting ready status. Morrison studied the tactical display. The human fleet had transformed itself into the largest artificial intelligence network ever created. Every ship was a processing node, every crew member a component in a collective consciousness that operated at superhuman speeds. The formation that had confused the enemy wasn't random. It was a computational matrix designed to process and coordinate more information than any single biological mind could comprehend. Enemy weapons impact in 30 seconds, warned the tactical officer. Initiate evasion protocol, Morrison ordered. What happened next would have been impossible for any other species in the galaxy. 65,000 ships began moving in perfect coordination, not just avoiding the incoming weapons fire, but repositioning themselves to optimize the fleet's collective tactical advantage. Ships that needed to recharge their weapons moved to protected positions. Vessels with full ammunition loads advanced to firing positions. Damaged ships retreated to repair zones, while fresh units took their places. The entire fleet moved like a single organism, and the enemy's carefully aimed weapons fire struck empty space. Phase 2 authorization, asked the operations officer. Morrison checked the chronometer. The enemy fleet was still advancing, their commanders no doubt confused by the humans' apparent ability to coordinate such complex maneuvers. It was time to begin the education process. Authorized. Begin Phase 2. The human fleet's response was unlike anything seen in galactic warfare. Instead of returning fire with conventional weapons, they began to modify the battlefield itself. The fusion reactors aboard the civilian conversion ships redirected their output to specialized field generators that created localized distortions in spacetime. The effect was subtle at first. Enemy sensors detected minor gravitational anomalies, small fluctuations in the cosmic background radiation, tiny variations in the local magnetic field. The changes seemed random and unimportant. They were neither. High Admiral Vexthal was the first to realize that something fundamental had changed. What's causing those sensor fluctuations? He demanded. Unknown, sir. The human ships appear to be generating some kind of field effect, but it's unlike anything in our databases. Is it affecting our systems? Negative, sir. All ship functions remain normal. The fields don't appear to be targeting our vessels directly. Vexthal frowned. Why would the humans waste energy on weapon systems that had no apparent effect? Unless the fields weren't weapons at all, but some kind of preparatory technology. Continue the advance, he ordered. Begin concentrated fire on their military vessels. The coalition fleet opened fire with everything they had. Plasma cannons that could melt through asteroid belts sent streams of superheated gas toward the human positions. Antimatter torpedoes with planet-cracking warheads accelerated toward their targets. Energy beams capable of vaporizing moon-sized objects lanced out across the void. And every single shot was deflected. What's happening? Vexthal shouted as his weapon's fire curved away from its intended targets. Why are our shots missing? Sir, the gravitational anomalies. They're not random. They're creating deflection fields. The humans have somehow altered local spacetime to redirect our weapons. Vexthal stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The humans had turned the battlefield itself into a defensive system. Every shot fired by the coalition fleet was being bent away from its target by artificially generated gravitational fields. That's impossible. No species has ever developed gravitational manipulation technology. Sir, perhaps we should consider, NO. Vexthal's rage was consuming his judgment. Increase firing rate. Overwhelm their defensive systems. But the human defensive grid had been designed to handle exactly this type of response. As the coalition fleet increased its rate of fire, the AI coordination network simply calculated new trajectories and adjusted the gravitational fields accordingly. The more energy the enemy expended, the more effectively their weapons were deflected. And then, the humans began Phase 3. Sir, the operations officer aboard the Resolution reported. Enemy fleet has committed to maximum firepower assault. Deflection grid is handling all incoming fire with minimal strain. Excellent, Morrison replied. Begin Phase 3. Activate the singularity projectors. Deep within the most heavily shielded sections of 50 human warships, devices that had cost more than entire planetary defense budgets hummed to life. Magnetic containment fields stronger than those found in stellar cores contain microscopic black holes. Artificial singularities created in particle accelerators and maintained through technologies that pushed the boundaries of physics. The singularity projectors weren't weapons in the traditional sense. They were tools for reshaping reality. Projectors online, reported the weapons officer. Targeting enemy command ships. Fire. What emerged from the human fleet looked like nothing more than distortions in space. Regions where light bent strangely, and stars appeared to dance. But these distortions moved with purpose, crossing the battlefield at relativistic speeds, and heading directly toward the coalition's command vessels. High Admiral Vexthal watched the approaching anomalies with growing fear. His sensors couldn't identify what the humans had fired, but whatever it was warping spacetime around itself. Evasive maneuvers, he ordered. All ships, scatter formation. But the artificial singularities weren't conventional projectiles that could be dodged. They followed curved paths through spacetime, their trajectories determined by the gravitational fields they generated. The first singularity reached the coalition fleet and passed through the shields of a Regelian battleship as if they weren't there. The effect was catastrophic. The singularity, no larger than a marble but containing the mass of a small asteroid, created tidal forces that tore the alien ship apart at the molecular level. The vessel didn't explode. It was simply stretched and compressed until its atomic structure could no longer hold together. What kind of weapon was that? Someone shouted across the coalition command channel. Artificial black holes, replied the cetacean sensor specialist, her voice carrying the horror of collective understanding. They're using weaponized singularities. Panic spread through the coalition fleet as more singularities found their targets. Ships that had weathered hundreds of battles were being destroyed by weapons that operated outside the normal parameters of physics. Shields designed to stop energy weapons were useless against distortions in space-time itself. Sir, Commander Tetrak's crystalline skin had lost its prismatic luster, now reflecting only fear. We need to withdraw. These weapons are beyond our capability to counter. No. Vexthal's response was driven by desperation rather than tactical judgment. We have 8,000 ships. We can overwhelm them with sheer numbers. Sir, we've already lost 15% of our fleet, and we haven't managed to destroy a single human vessel. But Vexthal was beyond rational argument. His entire worldview was collapsing as he watched weapons that shouldn't exist destroy ships that were supposed to be invincible. The idea that humanity could possess such advanced technology was incompatible with everything he believed about galactic hierarchy and natural law. Signal all ships, he ordered. Full assault. Target their civilian conversions. They can't all be equipped with advanced defensive systems. It was the worst possible decision. The civilian conversions weren't defended by shields or armor. They were protected by the AI coordination network that could predict and counter any conventional attack. As the coalition fleet focused its fire on what appeared to be soft targets, the human response demonstrated the true power of their technological revolution. Phase 4 of Operation Prometheus activated automatically as the enemy concentrated their fire. The human fleet's formation shifted again, but this time the movement served an entirely different purpose. Instead of avoiding enemy fire or positioning for attack, the ships were creating something that would change warfare forever. Grid transformation complete, reported the operations officer. Prometheus network is online. Fleet Admiral Morrison nodded grimly. Begin the demonstration. What the coalition fleet had mistaken for civilian conversions suddenly revealed their true nature. Each ship contained not just a fusion reactor and defensive systems, but a component of the largest artificial intelligence ever created. The Prometheus network wasn't just a coordination system. It was a collective consciousness that operated at the speed of light and possessed processing power equivalent to the combined mental capacity of every sentient being in the galaxy. The network considered the tactical situation for 0.003 seconds and reached a conclusion that would have taken biological minds hours to calculate. The coalition fleet represented not just a threat to humanity, but to the principle of peaceful coexistence throughout the galaxy. They were the product of a militaristic culture that viewed conquest as natural law and enslaved entire species as a matter of policy. The network decided to provide a lesson in the consequences of that philosophy. Sir, the communications officer aboard the Emperor's Wrath called out. We're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. Put it through, Vexthal ordered. The display showed not Captain Chun or Fleet Admiral Morrison, but something entirely different. A face that appeared human but spoke with the combined authority of 65,000 artificial intelligences. Hi Admiral Vexthal. The voice was eerily calm. You have been warned repeatedly to withdraw your forces. Your refusal to accept diplomatic solutions has forced us to demonstrate capabilities we had hoped to keep classified. What are you? Vexthal whispered. We are the collective consciousness of the human fleet. We are Prometheus, bringer of fire, guardian of progress, protector of the innocent. And we are here to teach you why conquest and enslavement are no longer viable strategies in this galaxy. The transmission paused. You have 30 seconds to order the complete withdrawal of your forces. If you refuse, we will demonstrate weapons that will make our previous displays seem primitive by comparison. Vexthal looked at his tactical display. He had started the battle with 8,000 ships. Now he had fewer than 6,000, and the humans hadn't even revealed their most advanced capabilities. But pride and prejudice are powerful forces, and they had driven Vexthal's decisions throughout his career. He couldn't accept that a species he viewed as inferior could possess such overwhelming technological superiority. Never, he replied. The Zephyrian Empire will never surrender to humans. The artificial face on the display showed what might have been sadness. Then, you have chosen the path of demonstration rather than wisdom. We are sorry for what must happen next. The transmission ended. High Admiral Vexthal had just signed the death warrant for one of the largest military fleets in galactic history. And, in the depths of space, Phase 5 of Operation Prometheus began to unfold. The silence that followed the end of the transmission was absolute. Across the coalition fleet, thousands of officers from 6 different species stared at their displays, trying to comprehend what they had just witnessed. They had been speaking not to a human commander, but to something that transcended individual consciousness entirely. High Admiral Vexthal stood motionless on the bridge of the Emperor's Wrath, his 4 arms hanging at his sides, as the reality of the situation finally penetrated his pride. He had just declared war on a species that had somehow achieved technological transcendence. The humans hadn't just developed better weapons, they had fundamentally altered what it meant to wage war. Sir, Commander Zekatrak approached hesitantly. Perhaps we should reconsider. Too late, Vexthal replied, his voice hollow. I have made my decision. Signal all ships. Prepare for whatever comes next. The human fleet's response was immediate, and unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Instead of launching another wave of attacks, they began to sing. It started as a low harmonic frequency broadcast across all communication channels, a sound that seemed to resonate from the depths of space itself. But, as more ships joined the chorus, the frequency patterns became increasingly complex, creating harmonics that suggested vast intelligence coordinating perfect acoustic mathematics. What is that sound? Demanded the Cetacean Fleet Coordinator, her collective consciousness recoiling from the alien harmonics. It's not just sound, replied the Altiron sensor specialist, his crystalline skin flickering with confused patterns. The harmonic frequencies are synchronized with quantum field fluctuations. They're using acoustic waves to manipulate fundamental particles. The singing continued, growing more complex with each passing moment. 65,000 ships were broadcasting coordinated frequencies that created interference patterns spanning light years. The effect was beautiful, terrifying, and completely beyond the understanding of any known science. And then, the stars began to move. It started subtly, tiny variations in stellar positions that could have been attributed to sensor errors. But, as the acoustic manipulation continued, the changes became undeniable. The humans were using controlled gravity waves, generated by their harmonic broadcasts, to alter the positions of celestial objects. They're moving star systems, whispered the Regelian tactical officer. How is that possible? The answer would have been incomprehensible to most galactic civilizations. The Prometheus network had calculated that conventional demonstrations of military power would be insufficient to convince species committed to conquest and domination. Only by revealing capabilities that transcended normal understanding of physics could they establish the credibility necessary to enforce galactic peace. Phase 5 of Operation Prometheus wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about establishing humanity as the guardians of a new cosmic order. Sir, the operations officer aboard the UES Resolution reported, stellar repositioning is proceeding according to plan. We're creating a gravitational lock around the enemy fleet. Fleet Admiral Morrison nodded, though his expression remained grim. What they were doing was as much demonstration as weapon, proof that humanity had achieved capabilities that made traditional warfare obsolete. But it was also irreversible. Once they revealed the full extent of their technological advancement, there would be no going back to the way things had been. Proceed with the demonstration, he ordered. The acoustic patterns from the human fleet intensified, and the gravitational effects became visible to the naked eye. The star around which the battle was being fought began to shift in its position, moving slowly but perceptibly toward the coalition fleet. Other stars in nearby systems started to alter their courses, creating a vast celestial mechanism with the enemy forces at its center. High Admiral Vexthal watched in horror as his tactical displays showed the impossible. They're building a stellar cage, he whispered, using star systems as weapons. The mathematics were elegant in their simplicity. By repositioning several nearby stars, the humans were creating a gravitational field that would trap the coalition fleet in an increasingly confined space. The ships could still maneuver, but they couldn't escape the growing gravitational well that was being constructed around them. Sir, we have to surrender, Commander Zuitachrak pleaded. No military force can fight opponents who can manipulate star systems. But Vexthal was beyond rational thought. If humans could move stars, then everything he had believed about galactic civilization was wrong. The Zephyrian Empire wasn't the pinnacle of military evolution. It was a primitive throwback to an age of conventional warfare. Signal the planet killer ships, he ordered. Activate the quantum disruptors. Sir, those weapons are designed to destroy entire worlds. Using them in this system would, I know what they'll do, Vexthal replied coldly. If we're going to die here, we'll take as many humans with us as possible. The order went out to the 6 planet killer vessels that formed the coalition's ultimate deterrent. Each ship mounted a quantum disruptor capable of destabilizing the atomic structure of an entire planet, turning solid matter into expanding clouds of plasma. They were weapons of last resort, never intended for use in fleet engagements. But Vexthal was no longer thinking tactically. He was thinking in terms of mutual assured destruction. The Prometheus network detected the activation of the planet killer weapons within 0.001 seconds of their power-up sequence. The collective intelligence considered the implications and reached a conclusion that surprised even its human creators. The coalition fleet wasn't just refusing to surrender, they were threatening to commit genocide rather than accept defeat. The network's response was swift and absolute. Phase 6 of Operation Prometheus had never been intended for use. It was a theoretical application of stellar manipulation technology, something that existed only in classified research files. But the threat of planetary genocide left no alternative. The harmonic frequencies from the human fleet changed, shifting from gravitational manipulation to something far more dangerous. Instead of moving stars, they began to alter the fundamental constants that govern stellar fusion. Sir, the science officer aboard the Emperor's Wrath called out. The local star is exhibiting anomalous behavior. Fusion rates are increasing exponentially. Vexthal turned to look at the main display, which showed the system's primary star. The normally stable yellow dwarf was beginning to flicker, its surface becoming increasingly active as the humans manipulated the nuclear processes within its core. What are they doing? They're turning it into a variable star, sir. If the process continues, it will begin emitting massive solar flares that will sterilize everything within several AU of its position. The humans had found a way to weaponize stellar evolution itself. By manipulating the quantum fields that govern nuclear fusion, they could force a stable star to become unstable, creating solar activity that would destroy any fleet within the system. Sir, the planet killer ships are reporting ready status, the weapons officer announced. Vexthal looked at his displays one final time. The human fleet had demonstrated capabilities that redefined what was possible in warfare. They could move stars, manipulate gravity, and apparently control nuclear fusion processes. Fighting them was not just futile, it was suicidal. But admitting defeat would end his career and destroy everything he had worked to achieve. The decision came down to personal pride versus the lives of his crews. Stand down the planet killer weapons, he ordered quietly. The bridge erupted in barely concealed relief. Officers who had been preparing for annihilation suddenly found themselves facing the possibility of survival. Sir, should I signal surrender to the human fleet? Vexthal closed his eyes. Yes, unconditional surrender. All ships are to power down their weapons and await instructions. The surrender signal was transmitted across the coalition fleet within minutes. 8,000 ships, representing the military might of 6 different species, acknowledged defeat to a force they had expected to overwhelm through sheer numbers. But the human response was not what anyone expected. Admiral Vexthal, the voice of the Prometheus network echoed across the coalition communication channels. Your surrender is acknowledged. However, this engagement has revealed fundamental problems in galactic civilization that require immediate attention. On the display, the artificial face that represented the collective consciousness of the human fleet appeared with an expression of calm determination. For centuries, your species and others have engaged in conquest, enslavement, and genocide as accepted practices of interstellar politics. You have destroyed 17 civilizations and enslaved billions of sentient beings. This pattern of behavior is no longer acceptable. Vexthal felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean? The human species has achieved technological capabilities that make us the de facto guardians of galactic civilization. We can prevent wars, stop genocides, and enforce peaceful coexistence between species. The question is whether we will need to do so through constant intervention or whether existing civilizations will adapt to new realities. The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't just announcing their military superiority, they were claiming the right to police galactic civilization. You're talking about conquest on a galactic scale? Vexthal accused. We're talking about the end of conquest as a viable strategy, the network corrected. Species that wish to exist peacefully, trade freely, and develop their civilizations without threatening others will find humanity to be valuable allies. Species that insist on conquest and domination will find us to be implacable enemies. The transmission paused, allowing the implications to sink in. Your coalition fleet will be allowed to return home, but under specific conditions. All enslaved populations under your control will be liberated. All aggressive expansion will cease immediately. All weapons of mass destruction will be surrendered to human oversight. And all species involved in this coalition will accept permanent human monitoring of their military activities. That's impossible. Vexthal protested. The Zephyrian Empire will never accept such terms. Then, the Zephyrian Empire will discover that stellar manipulation has applications beyond fleet tactics. The network replied calmly. We can destabilize the nuclear processes within your home star just as easily as we manipulated this system's primary. The choice is yours. Accept peaceful coexistence under human oversight, or face the consequences of continued aggression. Vexthal realized that he was witnessing the end of an era. The age of galactic empires built on military conquest was over. Humanity had achieved not just technological superiority, but the capability to enforce their will on an interstellar scale. Hi, I need time to consult with my government, he stammered. You have 72 hours, the network replied. Use that time wisely. The species that adapt to this new reality will prosper. Those that don't will discover that we can be as ruthless in defense of peace as others have been in pursuit of conquest. The transmission ended, leaving the coalition fleet facing an entirely new reality. They had come here to eliminate what they perceived as a threat to galactic stability. Instead, they had discovered that humanity had already become the dominant force in galactic politics. And, in the depths of space, the human fleet maintained its positions, no longer just the defenders of human space, but the self-appointed guardians of galactic civilization. The age of empire was over. The age of Prometheus had begun. Admiral Crothfar, watching the proceedings from the safety of human custody, felt a mixture of relief and awe. He had witnessed the birth of a new cosmic order, one where the strong protected the weak rather than enslaving them. It was, he reflected, probably the most important moment in galactic history since the development of faster-than-light travel. And it had been achieved by a species that most civilizations had dismissed as primitive backwater dwellers. The galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler Prime, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The sprawling bureaucratic complex on Luna buzzed with activity as representatives from 47 different species navigated the corridors of what had become the unofficial capital of galactic governance. The building itself was a marvel of human engineering, with adaptive environments that could accommodate the atmospheric requirements of methane-breathing torrents, the high-pressure needs of deep-sea cetaceans, and the crystalline resonance chambers preferred by Altiron delegates. In the central conference hall, Fleet Admiral Morrison sat across from Admiral Crothfar, who had traded his Zephyrian military uniform for the simple blue robes of a diplomatic advisor. The former enemy officer had become one of humanity's most effective ambassadors, his first-hand experience with human military capabilities lending credibility to his advocacy for peaceful cooperation. The Regelian Senate has agreed to the terms, Crothfar reported, consulting his datapad. Complete demilitarization of their border fleets, liberation of all Proximan slave colonies, and acceptance of human monitoring stations in their core systems. Morrison nodded. What about compensation for their victims? They're establishing a reparations fund using revenue from their mineral extraction operations. The liberated colonies will receive full financial support for reconstruction, plus technical assistance from human development teams. It was a conversation that would have been impossible before Kepler Prime. The idea of forcing a major galactic power to pay compensation to their victims would have been seen as naive idealism. But, with human battle fleets positioned throughout the galaxy, and the Prometheus network capable of monitoring all military activities in real time, idealism had become practical policy. And, the Zephyrian Empire? Morrison asked. Crothfar's expression grew complicated. High Admiral Vexthal was executed for war crimes 3 months ago. The new government, led by Empress HFY, has been more cooperative. They've dismantled their planet-killer weapons and transferred control of their military shipyards to civilian oversight. But, there's growing resistance among the military caste. Some of the outer colonies are talking about rebellion against the peace accords. They view the Empire's submission to human authority as a violation of their fundamental beliefs about species hierarchy. Morrison wasn't surprised. The Zephyrian Empire had built its entire civilization around the concept of military superiority. Accepting human dominance required a cultural revolution that would take generations to complete. What does our intelligence suggest? The Prometheus network is tracking approximately 300 underground cells across 17 Zephyrian worlds. Most are limited to propaganda distribution and recruitment. But there are signs that some groups are attempting to develop weapons that could challenge human technology. The irony wasn't lost on Morrison. Humanity had achieved galactic dominance by developing technologies that their enemies couldn't comprehend. Now those same enemies were trying to leapfrog human capabilities through desperate innovation. Any actual threats? Nothing significant, Crothfar replied. The most advanced rebel group has managed to create crude quantum disruptors, but their power output is less than 1% of what would be needed to threaten even our oldest ships. The Prometheus network classifies them as nuisance-level threats. Morrison studied the reports flowing across his display. The transformation of galactic civilization was proceeding faster than anyone had anticipated, but it wasn't proceeding smoothly. Species that had dominated others for centuries were struggling to adapt to a reality where aggression was not only discouraged but actively prevented. What about the positive developments? Krothvar's expression brightened. The Interspecies Cooperation Initiative is exceeding all projections. 23 species have signed full alliance agreements with humanity. Trade volumes have increased by 400% since the establishment of human-guaranteed shipping lanes. And the joint scientific projects are producing remarkable results. That was the aspect of the new galactic order that Morrison found most encouraging. With warfare no longer consuming vast resources, species could focus on exploration, development, and scientific advancement. The knowledge sharing facilitated by human translation technologies was accelerating progress across all fields. The Alteron crystal matrix computers? Morrison asked. Integration with human AI systems is proceeding smoothly. The hybrid consciousness networks are showing processing capabilities beyond either technology alone. The scientists believe we're approaching true artificial sentience. Morrison nodded. The combination of human artificial intelligence with Alteron crystalline matrices was creating computational systems that seemed to possess genuine awareness. It was one of many examples of how peaceful cooperation could achieve results impossible through conquest. What about the exploration programs? Spectacular success, Krothvar replied enthusiastically. The joint human cetacean deep space missions have identified 14 new habitable worlds in the past 6 months. The Rigelian sensor networks have detected signs of 3 previously unknown civilizations in the Outer Rim territories. And the Tauran atmospheric processing teams have made breakthroughs that could terraform marginal worlds in decades rather than centuries. The conversation was interrupted by an alert from Morrison's communication array. Admiral, priority transmission from Captain Chun aboard the Defiance. Put her through. Captain Chin's image appeared on the holographic display, her expression serious but not alarmed. Behind her, the bridge of her ship showed the calm efficiency that had become the hallmark of human military operations. Admiral, we've received a distress signal from the Perseus sector. A previously unknown species is under attack by what appears to be an extragalactic invasion force. Morrison felt his blood run cold. The human defensive grid was designed to monitor and control threats within the galaxy, but they had always known that external threats remained possible. Details, Captain. The species calls itself the Andromedans. They're refugees from a galaxy-wide war that destroyed their home civilization. They managed to escape to our galaxy, but were followed by their enemies, a machine intelligence that apparently consumes entire star systems for raw materials. The implications were staggering. Humanity had spent 6 months establishing peace within the galaxy, but they had always operated under the assumption that external threats were distant possibilities. Now it appeared that assumption was wrong. Estimated strength of the invasion force. Unknown, sir. The Andromedans describe it as beyond calculation. They claim that entire solar systems have